The next panel, I don't think they need any introduction, but these are going to speak on how effective is EB-5 as alternative financing. We have, of course, Mona Shaw. We have Nick Mastriani. We have Governor David Patterson. We have Jeffrey Grasso. We have Aaron Goforth, Michael Scotianfield, and last but not least, we have Michael Gibson. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all again for coming. And we have a wonderful panel here, quite a large panel, but we're expecting a little bit of fire. So, yes, I know, Peter, you look surprised.
That would be around.
Right. Well, we're talking about a topic which everybody really wants to know, because there's developers approach us all the time, and new developers want to come in, and they really want to understand how effective is EB-5 really as alternative financing? I mean, what are the issues which really come up that are good for developers, not so good for developers? And we have some specific questions that we are going to be asking our wonderful panelists. I'm going to start off by looking at some of the projects which EB-5 has done. I'm going to ask a few of the panelists about that. And I know many of you have already heard about some of the great projects, but Nick, I'm going to start with you, because you are the one who are the most famous out there.
Where would you like me to start, Mona?
So, what have you used EB-5 financing for?
So we've been doing this since about 2010, and we found that the EB-5 capital works best with developers in a mezzanine position, so long as you have a senior lender, that's willing to enter into an intercreditor agreement, which really protects your investors. So the projects, that they make a lot of sense on, for us are rentals, government infrastructure projects, some condominium projects, some hospitality. It doesn't really matter the project type. It really matters, what drives your economic model, because the capital that we raise into projects is really never more than 30% of the capital stack. It's really difficult for EB-5 capital to be a senior mortgage. The days of using tenant jobs are over, so you're really limited to direct jobs if you're in a hotel or hospitality industry, or by and large construction spending if your project spans more than 24 months. That's really what works best. But for a developer, you have to be able to fit into the capital stack, as I said, with the senior lender, which is very important. Because a lot of times banks want to cram down EB-5 capital into a position that it really has no voice, no rights, no remedies. And in those cases, it doesn't really meet the 40 Act. In fact, it doesn't meet the 40 Act. But so really, that's really how we use it, and that's how it best serves the developer to lower the senior loan amount and kind of de-risk the project, if you will.
Well, Nick, you're really referring to projects related in real estate, though, right?
I am referring to only real estate projects, correct.
Right. What about projects outside of real estate? And are there any projects that you have done, for example, that would not have moved forward but for EB-5 capital?
We've done, it's still real estate. We've done some renovations. We're funding the Nassau Coliseum renovation right now, which is not
that's a good one.
Right, it's not a ground-up project, but it's a total renovation. It's about a $100 million renovation, and that project uses some of the gross revenue, a highly discounted a portion of it, because there's not a lot of construction jobs, and it's a 24-month project, but there's really not enough construction dollars being spent to raise the capital that was needed to do the renovation. So we have used, in that case, some of the revenue from the events.
And if anybody out there who really isn't aware, a project like Nassau Coliseum was a project which really did need renovation. It's needed it for some time. Jeff, you've done real estate projects in New York as well.
Yeah, so for Silverstein Properties, our first project and project that we've raised successfully to date was a $250 million raise for our Four Seasons hotels and private residences downtown. EB-5 was particularly effective because when we were out in the markets in 2010 and 11 to find a lender commitment to develop the project, the capital markets were sort of in disarray, and there weren't a lot of institutions out there willing to take exposure to a five-star hotel in downtown Manhattan at the time. We look at the project as part of our greater World Trade Center initiative. You need certain amenities downtown to attract these Fortune 100 tenants. So having a five-star hotel, a five-star restaurant, adds to the sense of place we're trying to create. And that EB-5 loan came in as a senior mortgage for a hotel, which will successfully be opened in August of this year, and construction works will be completed by fall. Other activity we use EB-5 for is Tower 2 at the World Trade Center. That'll probably be somewhere in around a $500 million raise. That'll be a subordinate debt piece in the capital stack. And we'll continue to look throughout our pipeline to invest EB-5 capital in our New York-based projects.
Yeah, but Jeff, Silverstein is known by everybody. Wouldn't you be able to get alternative financing elsewhere? Is there any particular reason why you decided to go forward with EB-5?
Sure. So for us, these projects aren't always necessarily conventional developments. It's, say Tower 2 at the Trade Center. It's a high-end hotel and condo where we try to accelerate our development schedule, which EB-5 allows us to do. Having that lower cost of financing makes it viable for those projects to get built, where those projects would get built, but maybe later on in the cycle, and would be have more correlation to capital markets ebbs and flows, where EB-5 is a steady source of financing that allows us to get ahead of where the cycle is, to start these jobs sooner, create construction jobs, and allows us to complete a product that is part of our portfolio for a long term.
Right. Well, I'm going to come back to you and Nick, and I'm going to ask you some, in a few moments, I'm going to ask you some thorny questions. But before I go there, Mike Schofield, have you done projects which would not have been able to move forward but for EB-5 capital?
Yep, and our projects are pretty similar to Nick's, where we usually focus on the mezzanine debt position. We have hotel and condominium projects in Florida, and where we really focus is on projects where the developer has enough equity to move forward with a project. So if it's a $100 million project, there's a $60 million construction loan and $40 million of combined developer equity in EB-5, and they have enough equity to be able to move forward with a project and wait for EB-5 to come in and recap a portion of the equity. So what's most important to us is to know that a project can move forward with or without the EB-5, and using EB-5 so that once that project's underway and the EB-5 comes in, the developer is able to undertake another project with the equity that would have been stuck in the first project. So it's not as much that this first project wouldn't have happened without EB-5, but instead they're able to do more projects because of the EB-5.
Okay. Matt, you're here to talk about projects other than real estate projects. And I know you are familiar with EB-5 through projects other than real estate projects.
That's correct. Well, first of all, I come at it from a very different perspective. Unlike the real estate professionals, I'm a transportation guy. The governor looks at it from the standpoint of job creation and his service on the MTA board. I was the taxi commissioner in New York City for a very long time. I'm now in charge of all the regulators worldwide, and I'm a transportation corporate regulatory lawyer and also an academic at CUNY at City College. So all I do is live and breathe transportation, and some companies that you may be familiar with, such as Uber and Lyft, and the disruption that they have created in the marketplace. But there are basically three, I look at EB-5 as this newfound money, which almost serves as a subsidy to correct some of the wrongs that some of these companies have created and to solve problems that have been long-standing for many years. In three areas, really. Everybody wants efficient, affordable transportation. So from an equity standpoint, underserved communities, which are not being served by vehicles that are surge pricing at $100 a pop for a fare, need to be served by cars that can get there efficiently. Just because you don't have a phone, you don't have money, doesn't mean that you should have less quality transportation. Number two, there are transportation deserts in our cities where you can't get from one place to another. So mass transit doesn't solve the problem. So on the equity side, that's one problem that's being solved. And that also, when you make transportation more efficient through the use of an app, and EB-5 funds that, it helps the environment, making it more sustainable. The big issue, which is companies like La Puma and New Ride, which are the only companies that I'm aware of that are doing this, they employ an employee model because there are two other issues, the labor issue and the disability issue. Disabled folks cannot get around in this city. Accessoride is a disaster and it's not a solution, okay? There are brokerage contracts that the MTA has, which is fixing the problem now in New York City, where you can hire liveries and black cars to go point to point. They should be using apps, and EB-5 has been used for the Wi-Fi system indirectly in the city. But I think the real solution to the disability issue, to get people not to have to go to the theater and make reservations a week in advance, and the governor's been a big advocate for this, by the way, we need to basically have apps and have foreign investment fill the gap between what the cost is to provide this service and what it actually costs. We're wasting billions of dollars in every city by subsidizing accessoride vehicles that have multiple passengers where 1.5 people use them every day. So basically, it's a $60 ride, which could be provided by a livery or black car for $15 to $20, or certainly less than $60. EB-5 money will create the subsidies that will make the difference between the extra costs of retrofitting vehicles to have wheelchair ramps and also to have an employee model. The big problem why we don't have good wheelchair accessible service, despite our best efforts in New York and elsewhere around our country, is because we have an independent contractor model where drivers purchase these vehicles. They don't have, they're making a loss on every ride. So an employee model means that there are people that are driving these cars day in and day out that are always available to serve the disabled. And you know, the last thing, you know, you may have heard there's a $100 million lawsuit that was settled on the West Coast where independent contractor drivers working for Uber were alleged to be employees. This whole thing is changing, and eventually we're moving to autonomous and connected vehicles over time. But EB-5, rather than taxpayers, is a great alternative to bring foreign investment money in so that us as taxpayers don't have to subsidize all this waste and these services. This should be brought in to private companies to outsource services such as accessoride and using apps and technology. And I'm looking at it as a problem-solving thing, frankly, in addition to helping the economy and creating jobs.
Well, I think we should have some members of Congress sitting here right now just to listen to the passion coming out of this panel.
Well, he told me I should be running for something, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, thank you, Matt. I mean, what we are hearing, audience, I'm sure you can hear that, yes, there's lots of different types of projects that you can use EB-5 for. And Governor, what have you seen in New York City right now with EB-5? You know that New York City has perhaps the most investors for EB-5 than any other state.
When I signed the first agreement with the USCIS on behalf of the state of New York in 2008, I was really aiming it at companies like Silverstein, the major companies that could create as many jobs as possible to try to ameliorate a recession that was bordering on becoming another Great Depression. But as time went on and I started to work in the field, it did seem to me that, not necessarily by intent, but by practice, people seemed to feel that was the only type of use was for large condominiums or hotels, etc. But certainly in the situation in New York City, and this is where government was unable to fulfill the expectations of the people, both mayors Bloomberg and de Blasio promised the disabled community that 20% of the new green taxis that serve the outer boroughs and serve exactly those areas that Matt was talking about, which are deserts of transportation or two-fare zones, that 20% of those vehicles would be disabled accessible. And to try to do that, they were only going to charge the drivers of those cars $15,000 to have a medallion. Even when they lowered it to zero and we're going to give the cars away, it's just a function of taxi driving that if you're spending all your time helping passengers in and out of the cars, you're not going to make as much money. So this led me to Mona, and Nadim, and Anthony, and Matt, and the people who were working with New Ride and La Puma, in that they took the company and worked with the drivers directly as employees. So for the time that you're driving the car, you have a set fare you're going to make, and you can keep the tips. So this would be the best way to make money for your taxi driver, but it was also the best for passengers because now the driver's not in a hurry, and it eliminates the possibility of accidents, so the right care for passengers can occur. Now, the funding of this, involved a raise, and we weren't sure how people would feel since the alternative was so much different than what happened before. But there's one thing that's a little different about people who are not in the United States. People in the United States like everything except their government. People in other countries, the government, even when the government is somewhat oppressive, isn't half as oppressive as the private sector. So the fact that this project was going to be a benefit to government and was going to be able to resolve an issue that for the last 4 years, the mayors keep putting the date back. See, that's how we address things in government when we can't fix them. We say we're going to fix them later. And, they're doing that. But the fact is, this model that I just described fixes the problem. So it's a raise that not only is beneficial to the investors and helps the company, but it does the public good, which so many of us in public service set out to do in the first place.
Well, Governor, I realize that you also, like Matt, are passionate about transportation, but other than transportation, what do you know of EB-5 projects in New York City, which is your state?
Well, there is currently an attempt to use EB-5 for a lot of the types of infrastructure repair, particularly rebuilding the Tappan Zee Bridge, which sounds like another huge project, but it really is an emergency that has to be addressed. There are discussions about EB-5 in terms of even the entertainment industry. The film industry, for instance, has started to look into EB-5 raises because that whole process can go a lot faster with those types of investors. And then finally, there's always been kind of a discussion just about EB-5 as seed money, even for not-for-profit activities, which again do the public good. And I think you'll hear a lot more about those as people realize that the transition is almost seamless.
Right, but and this is open to the panel here. It's all good to have projects which are for the public good, but what about repaying the investors? Surely that's one of the endpoints of EB-5. Nick, do you have a comment?
Well, it's interesting to hear, and I think transportation is a great use for the capital. I just think that the markets that are biggest in EB-5 don't really recognize that, like China and Asia. I think they're focused on real estate, but good point, Mona, on repaying the investors. So, I mean, that's the biggest question is they don't mind making an investment. They want to know how they're going to get paid back. So, when you look at projects, and you mentioned Silverstein, we worked with Durst, Forest City Ratner, the list goes on, Whitcock, Fisher Brothers. These are companies that have a substantial track record, and they use the alternative financing in a mezzanine position because traditional mezzanine, is high rate money with very difficult terms, and so when it comes to EB-5 money, you're not a qualified developer when you provide capital. All you are is a source of capital, so you negotiate the best rights you can negotiate. But at the end of the day, if you're Carlyle or Invesco or one of these big mezz lenders, you can step in and be the developer. So for a developer, it's an alternative source of financing that almost kind of looks like equity. So for them, it really jumpstarts a project. And in 2009 and 10, when there was no construction going on in the city, it actually got. I mean, we funded about $7 billion worth of construction ourselves. About a third of that would not have gotten funded hadn't been for EB-5 capital. And banks would not have allowed that capital to come into the capital stack if developers like the Durst organization, Whitcock, Fisher Brothers, Forest City Radnor didn't really step up and say, hey, this is good for us, it's good for the economy, it's going to create tens of thousands of jobs, and they really got it to be a mainstream, financing platform. And with these companies, they're going to pay the money back. There's no question about it. They're not going to take money, and and worry about it later. So, I mean, these are important factors. When it comes to transportation and infrastructure, there are also repayment strategies that I'm not in the weeds like these guys are, but I think it's important that it's diverse and that the funds are used, to benefit as many sectors in the economy as possible, because it's all about job creation and foreign investment, without any taxation on U.S. citizens. So, I mean, I think that's really how you look at it, to be honest with you.
Then, Michael, whenever developers see you in a conference, they get scared because of your wonderful due diligence bulletins and a lot of things that you say about projects. You focused a lot on repayment of capital and how EB-5 is used as an alternative. How would you suggest, from what you've heard right now about using it as alternative capital moving forward in the program it is now?
Yeah, before I really get into the investor repayment, the focus of the panel, I think, is a great one, talking about EB-5 as a source of alternate finance. And I think years from now, we're going to look back at just even a few years ago at the 2009, 2010, 11 as being the golden days for EB-5, because unfortunately what's happened right now, I mean, despite the fraud and the SEC and all those, is that the access to capital is extremely limited. And what we see in comparing and analyzing projects is essentially two classes of issuers out there. Ones that are going to realistically have a chance to do their capital raise, and some gentlemen are here on this panel, have done it before. But for people who are coming in now or who just started the process, maybe just created a regional center, we estimate the chances of them being able to use EB-5 to capitalize their projects as being in the single digits. And the problem is that, one, the market is hyper-focused in China. You just saw from the last panel. Everybody is in China, especially if you have a multi-million-dollar project, you have to go there simply just because of the numbers. And as the panelists said in the last panel, there are probably 800 to 1,000 projects in the market. I mean, I'll just take this table right here. I bet the guys here on this table could fill up the EB-5 quota for the next 2 years. Maybe add a few more hotel developers in the room. You think about it, 3 to 4 billion can come in each year from EB-5. And these guys here alone are taking up, if not half, more. So the question is, I think,
Well, then they need to increase the visa numbers then.
well, that's Congress. But what I'm saying, the current mathematical reality for people in the audience who may be a new developer looking to raise capital is that your competition is fierce, and they're planted. As Brian said in the last panel, these are guys who got in the market in 08, 09, 10. They planted their flag. They established relationships with the agents, and they have the ability to raise capital. For the new guy coming in, even at whatever rates the agents want to charge, which is, if one thing you can, if there was a graph here, you could see, on one hand, the investor capital acquisition costs have increased dramatically because the agents, it's a supply-demand market.
Well, Michael, I want to differ here, and please, the panelists jump in on this. And Aaron, we haven't heard from you yet also, sorry. I think that it's not necessarily the fact that a new developer comes in. I just think that some people have good projects. Aaron, what would you say? You see quite a lot of projects on the market.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of considerations. One is, does the project create jobs?
Yeah.
And is there a likelihood those jobs will be created? So that's kind of the motherhood and apple pie of the program. Direct investment in the U.S. for job-creating projects. Certainly, over the maturity of the industry, we see EB-5 utilized more as a institutional form of capital, a mezz piece in these large projects. That being said, that currently is the mainstream of the China market from my point of view. But there's also a good place for, if not for EB-5 projects to move forward. So if there's a good project, and I think more importantly, is it marketable? Are you tied back to a market that will fund that type of asset? So, we see a broad spectrum of projects. We see several quick service restaurants. We see alternative energy, infrastructure projects, not the mainstream, but if you're tied back to a market that will see the benefits of the investment, you certainly have the possibility of funding that project.
Yeah, but I would say also that there's been a change in the investor. The investor themselves have become more intelligent. Matt, you're shaking your head. They're looking for projects where, they can really see something.
Well, I mean, I'm not an EB-5 expert like Mona is, but I'm a transportation guy, like I said. And in my opinion, Congress should be not just looking at job creation, which is a good thing, but we should be looking at helping people. We should be looking at, can we create jobs, give a return on investment, but also solve some of our problems. And in the transportation area, the governor made reference to the Tappan Zee project, infrastructure, that's great. The Wi-Fi system in the subway, indirectly, that was EB-5 funded. Right. But there's only one project I'm aware of in the United States where people are actually being served and helped, and that's the Green Transportation New York New Ride project, which we haven't really discussed, well, where you have these companies that have
with all respect, Matt, we're trying to be a little broader here, though. We don't want to just focus on one, but
this company, I think, is a model in many ways for where we go with the program from a policy standpoint, in my opinion, because first of all, in theory, you get a private company that's engaged in for-hire transportation, helping the disabled and helping with green, electric cars, let's say, with employees. You're creating jobs, but you're also getting an immediate cash return. You're not having to wait. No, with all due respect to my real estate brethren here, the project has to be developed, space has to be leased. The money comes in instantaneously with transportation. Now, the government is another option. I've heard different viewpoints on whether EB-5 money should go to a government agency like the MTA, where they can then contract out with private companies. Now, that may take a little bit of a longer return on investment, like a bond. You're going to eventually get the money, but frankly, I don't want the government to go in debt and have to buy money from China to pay back the EB-5 investors. So I think transit-oriented development is where it all comes together. I think in terms of real estate and transportation, as an academic in the sustainability field, Portland, all these cities around the country are now looking to get rid of cars and build shopping, real estate developments where people live and walk and get access to rail and transportation, all in the same location, and that brings all the worlds together. So I think that's another area where I think the real estate development and transportation world could all work together, and I think it would be a great way to create jobs and make a more sustainable future to solve problems, because it's not just about job creation, in my opinion. That act should be amended to create jobs and help people's lives, help the environment, and have another public good or another public policy behind it.
Right, but spoken like a lawyer, you didn't answer the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question was...
That's what lawyers are supposed to do, not answer the question. I have no recollection of that.
The investor today are more intelligent. The investors who are coming in, they're looking at projects at a different way. I mean, Michael brought up a fantastic point that there's a lot of established regional centers and developers out there. How does a new person even get their foot in the door? Governor, you have a point.
Well, I think Michael's right about that point, and to some degree I take responsibility for the fact that it got that way, but we were trying to address a crisis at that particular time, and we did. That being said, I think that in many respects we picked the low-hanging fruit from that source, and so you could say that that was the golden age. But there may be a new golden age when we think of the fact that not only is the investor going to be far more savvy, but the regions where the investments are indigenous may also expand. Brazil, Vietnam, India, places that I think are untapped resources for EB-5 funding. And I think that, institutional relationships remain, but there are, I think, new relationships that can be made, and can be made by alternative EB-5 raising entities. And actually, I don't think it would be the most difficult thing to do at this point.
All right, Mike, you had a point.
Sure. I would say that in general, the market's just becoming more sophisticated.
Right.
Now, having a good project, that's table stakes. It's not, 3 years ago, you would see a lot of bad projects that were actually raising funds. Sorry about that. But at this point, what you're seeing is that a good project is the starting point. And then after that, you have to have the persistence to go through, to learn how the market works, and really have the follow through to find the money. It is cheap capital, but it's not easy capital. And that's a few years ago. The golden age was probably when the money would fall into your lap if you had a project. Now you need to have a good project, and you have to have the follow through to find the money.
All right. I have a little thorny question here because this is for Jeff and this is for Nick. There's a lot of developers who want to have their own regional centers. And when they have their own regional centers, they're raising funds for themselves. How do you view that moving forward as an investor? Wouldn't you rather go into a regional center, if you put yourself in the investor's shoes, where the regional center was the developer as well? Nick?
Well, yeah, Mona. I mean, the point is well taken. I mean, investors are really savvy. They get it. They understand it. You know, developers that have their own regional center, you know, they have certain disclosures to make. So if you look at the integrity measures that are being set forth right now through Senator Flake and Senator Cornyn and Senator Schumer, you know, there's a lot of disclosure required for that. It's not a bad thing. It's just a different way of doing things. We actually started out doing it that way. But what we found is that investors really want to be protected, and they want the regional center and the general partner to not be part of the borrowing entity of the developer. And what you'll also find is that many banks, most of them in fact, won't take subordinate debt from a regional center that also owns the project. You've got to bring it as equity. And it just creates challenges that are disclosable. But I think, I think with the right developers, you know, it makes sense, and it does work. But I think to Michael's point, Mona, and I don't want to get off your topic, the market
okay.
is no. I mean, I think it's an important point. If people are trying to start out in the business, the market is pretty much spoken for. I mean, there are third-tier agencies that you can get into, but the top tier, there's maybe 5. Below that, there's maybe 7. I mean, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, they're spoken for. I mean, they're busy for the next 5 years. They don't have room, and they have such a responsibility to their current projects that they have to manage these people for 5, 10 years in some cases. That it's really it's a relationship that's really difficult to bring into, and it would cause lots of issues. So therefore, that's why you see, you know, a lot of the bigger getting bigger, and it's really harder for smaller companies to get in. You know, smaller companies can certainly sell projects, you know, in third-tier agencies, which you have to be careful because there's a lot of due diligence and transparency that's required that you enjoy your exemptions from. So you really need to know what your agent's doing, how they're selling your project, how they're representing you and your investment, because you're the offerer of the securities and you have ultimate personal liability for what they do in that market. That's a very important point that people sometimes glaze over and they go, well, what does that mean? Well, I see Kurt sitting out here. He knows what that means. It's a very important topic, and the cost of, you know, maintaining compliance and due diligence, it costs us $1.5 million a year in our organization just to run that side of the business. It's something that you have to do because it's going to be a requirement in the law come sometime, hopefully sooner rather than later. So then, you know, it creates a different barrier. People that want to borrow money in the EB-5 industry are better served to work with you know, regional centers that are in the market. They can deliver the capital predictably, you know, in a certain period of time, as opposed to try to, you know, butt heads with these projects that are out there, because I started that way and it's very difficult. And now it's even more difficult than it was in 2010. People have gotten smarter, they've gotten wiser, and there's a lot of news out there. So, you know, people listen and they pay attention. But, I mean, I think they're all good points that are being made, and the market has definitely changed and will continue to change.
Jeff, what do you say?
So, you know, for us, to Nick's point, you know, we are for increasing oversight and transparency and institutionalizing the business. You know,
Can you get closer to your microphone, please? Thank you.
Sure. So, you know, we're for increased oversight and transparency into this industry, and it's further institutionalizing the business. You know, for us, we rely upon who we are as a firm, and we've been around for 60 years. We've developed all through Manhattan. So part of when we go to China to meet with these investors is giving that story of who we are. And we're not just here for a quick profit. We're long-term holders of real estate. It's how we structure our deals. You know, our first deal was a senior mortgage. You know, that was very widely accepted through all of our prospective investors because they understood that model. And the sort of deals we're going out for now, aren't further down in the capital stack than say 75, 80%, where you're seeing conventional institutions lend as well. And for us, as part of increasing that transparency, in our first deal, we had 500 investors. More than 15% of those investors flew to New York, met us, walked our construction site, walked our World Trade Center complex, saw our sales center for the hotel. So we're able to offer something tangible that they can come, visit, touch, feel, bring their families, and we're for that transparency because we regard them as a partner, not just part of the food chain in EB-5.
But Jeff, then you're saying the same as what Nick's saying and as what Michael is suggesting, that there isn't room for new developers. And I don't agree with you.
I
Aaron,
think it's more challenging. I think it's more challenging.
Yes.
I mean, when we started our regional center 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was less institutionalized than it is today.
that doesn't still stop new developers coming in.
No, and I think the market should encourage that.
Right.
Competition's good. Like,
Aaron.
competition makes, what we're offering our investor, to a better product. So I would agree with you.
Yeah, so it's interesting being on this panel, right? They have such institutional people. 5, 10 years ago, it'd be a much different audience up
Right.
here. But the funny thing is, the message is kind of the same. 5 years ago, it was too late for anybody else to get an EB-5. Everybody else has got it figured out. So I think you just have to be really smart in who you partner with. So the great thing about the institutional developers and regional centers and established intermediaries is you can pick partners. You don't have to figure it out yourself. It's just a different approach to be successful than it was 5, 10 years ago.
Michael, do you think it's a good idea for new developers, if they've got a good project, to go with an existing regional center or open their own?
It's a cost-benefit analysis I think you have to do. So what we've seen is a trend, and somebody here on the panel mentioned that there's, I think, a trend to going more to smaller direct. It was Aaron, I think, who said you're seeing some smaller scale projects. So people have gone to China. We've heard a number of horror stories, developers, and I mean large regional size developers who do $10 million, $20 million worth of business a year, and they've gone to China to raise funds for their next hotel or mixed-use office building, and they can't for reasons that Nick mentioned, because the top-tier agents their book is full for the next 5 years. So Mona, to answer your question, what we've seen is that if they go to a regional center, the regional center, first of all, is saying to them, hey, we've already got, a pipeline, and our pipeline's full for 2 or 3 years. So a lot have started to opt out of the regional center model, and they're saying, okay, we're going to lower the amount of equity funding we need from EB-5 to qualify for the senior loan, and we're going to do it direct because we know we can hire enough people. These may not be construction jobs. They may actually be a trend towards fast food franchises or manufacturing, where they're going to create sufficient payroll jobs to satisfy the direct investment requirements. So I think if there is an opening here, it's probably not for more mega huge $100 million plus offerings in the market. I think those guys are established. Where there is an opening is for smaller direct projects, and I mean under 25 million, probably under 10 million, where you're actually going to create sufficient jobs directly. And maybe he's adding, I mean, we've got Jeff over here. He could do all sorts of input and output on indirect and induce. But your job creation requirements are going to be smaller. I think that's an opening. And you don't market in China. You avoid China like the plague. Because the reality is China doesn't want to market small projects. So you've got to go maybe to Russia, Brazil, establish relationships with people in India. Stay away from China. It's just going to cost a ton, and you're probably not going to raise a dollar. And do it directly. Meet with immigration attorneys and sell your project based on quality, and give them a good deal. Give them a fair deal. Don't give them a 0.25% return. Yeah. Give them a 2% return.
Some good advice. Michael, you've got more than one regional center. They take an awful long time now to come through. How long did you wait for your regional center? For
Exactly.
anybody who's actually out there thinking of putting their own regional center up.
So we have 15 approved regional centers. They cover 21 states. The fastest we'd one approved was about 4 months, and it took almost a year for one of ours to be approved. So that was the range. And processing times, it's a little unpredictable with USCIS. It's almost like a black box. Once your application goes in, you don't know when it's going to come back out. They say they're hiring more adjudicators and it'll speed up, but it's hard to know. So that's one of the other issues with starting a new regional center, is just that if you want the capital now, by the time your regional center is approved, then you have to bring the project to market, and then you're looking at an extremely long timeline to get the cash. So it'll either be for your next project, or you're going to be sitting on your piece of land or your idea for the next 2 years until you're fully ready to go.
Michael, so 15 regional centers is a lot of regional centers. It's obvious that you are not the developer. So what are your thoughts about developers having their own regional centers?
So it's if you're a large developer and you're going to be doing multiple projects, and this is going to be a key piece of your business, and you're going to invest in getting the staff to run a regional center, in the marketing arm in China, and all of that, then sure, it makes sense to get a regional center. But if you're going to be doing projects in different areas, or if it's a one-off project, or if you just want the independence of a regional center that knows what they're doing, it makes a lot more sense to partner with an existing regional center. So we've seen cases where it can go either way. Large developers like Silverstein, it makes a lot of sense to have your own regional center. But if you're a smaller developer, and let's say you do a development in Florida, and then one in Texas, and then one in North Carolina, your one regional center isn't going to help you because those projects are all over. So you really need to be geographically focused and have a big pipeline of projects for it to be worth it.
Okay, this question's out to all the panel. Now, in the last year, when the new legislation was being drafted, there was so much uproar, which there still is, about urban versus rural. I'm going back to my original question about repaying the investors. Now, in your experience, urban versus rural, what are your thoughts, Nick?
Well, listen, I got to be careful what I say because I'm obviously biased to urban, although I believe that money should be used in both markets. The problem that I see with urban versus rural is that rural is really not regulated. It's really not managed very properly. It's kind of off the radar. There are different types of projects, from chicken farms to potato farms to turkey farms to, I don't want to say ski resorts for any particular reason, but I'm not saying it for any particular reason. I'm saying if you think about serving an urban, a rural community, you're not going to serve millionaires skiing down ski resorts. I don't think you are. This was said by Senator Schumer in the last hearings. If you really want to help, rural communities, you're going to help farmers, which it was originally intended, partially intended for, and things of that nature. Because, all this demand about,
But can you get repaid if you've helped a farmer?
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So when you develop a project, it has to be economically feasible, right? So if a ski resort or other type of urban rural development is not making money, why would you expand it? Why would you put more capital into it? And how are you going to eventually repay these investors? Well, I think it's very difficult to prove an exit strategy or a refinance, because if you could get refinanced, you would have just refinanced in the first place. I think it's very well used in rural markets, in the right types of projects where you're growing a product, you're doing manufacturing of some sort, whether it's biofuel, solar panels. I think that all works very well. I think you have to be very careful if you're thinking about repayment. With respect to real estate and manufacturing and transportation and infrastructure, you know how you're getting paid back.
Yeah.
Transportation, as you guys said, which is a great outlet. Infrastructure, you got tolls and bridges and bonds. Real estate, if it's a rental project, you've got rental income, you have cash sweeping abilities, in your documents. So there's ways to protect people, to get repaid. But, it's tough to navigate. If you're an investor, it's really tough to navigate.
Governor?
Well, the federal government right now has a whole investment policy and even agencies for land banking, food cooperatives, for machinery that's used in farming, and also for produce. And these are federally protected agencies, in that if an investment fails, the federal government will cover it. Well, sometimes it takes a long time to make these things happen. So I see a perfect way for EB-5 to be slotted into that situation and it be effective for everyone. I think the issue of investor repayment really, all told, needs to be revisited because there are too many things that can go wrong. There's one EB-5 project where they're building a hotel, and then the developers, the family members, started fighting, and now they're suing each other, and the project has been stagnant for a couple of years now. So I think there's got to be a way in which those investors who put their money in and have already started the process maybe even could be switched to another project.
You know, the government makes a good point. If you're an investor coming from another country and you're with your wife and your 2 children, if it was me with my wife and 2 children, I would choose a project where I have a strong developer, good collateral, good real estate, location, and a good exit strategy.
But
I mean, why take a chance with your family?
But then what about paying a little bit more for that?
People will pay a little more for that.
Because
it's not even an issue.
Because that's really, I think, what it boils down to. If you're going to have a 2-tier market, then there should be 2 tiers of payment and not everything at 500.
Go further with that?
She's talking about setting aside visas for different categories where.
I'm talking about I'm talking about because one of the big issues, and I'm not going to go into TEA right now, but one of the big issues was the fact that everybody wanted to be at 500,000, and a lot of people in other parts of the country don't feel it's fair that projects in, say, New York would still be at 500, and a project in rural, Kansas is at 500.
Sounds fine to me.
No comment.
Come on, Nick.
Good.
Listen, 90%. Let's ask Michael where most of the failures come from in the market. I mean, you probably.
He was next.
No, it's absolutely true. You look Mamtech. You look at we talk about ski resorts, but you look at South Dakota, the beef packing plant, Green Tech, which looks like it's going to go out. All of those have been rural, and I'll agree with you, Nick, 100%. But I'm in Miami, and I will tell you this: there is a number of real estate projects in Miami, and it's not me. This is Miami Herald. So they are showing the inventory increasing dramatically, and the sales have been, treading water and starting to come down. So we ourselves in Miami may be facing a real estate glut and it's high-end residential, so they may not be able to sell. It could happen either rural or it could happen in urban environments. It as Nick said, it depends on the strength of the market and the underlying asset.
But I think at the end of the day, you look at an urban market like New York, this is the most liquid market in probably the whole world for real estate. So in terms of repayment to the investor, you have more equity investors, mezz investors, senior financing banks who are willing to lend, purchase, invest in this real estate. So the likelihood of repayment is even further increased here, and there's even more safety of investment, given that even if you look in the downturn from 2008 to 11, it was a relatively short contraction as compared to even some other secondary urban markets and definitely rural markets throughout America.
In addition to the repayment aspect, the other thing is just the investor's familiarity of the city. It's much easier to convince an investor to invest in New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Miami, than somewhere that they don't know. If you're going to Nebraska, that's one more thing you have to sell to the investor of where it is, who lives there, what the industries are. It's another piece of education that you don't have to do with New York. So it's just an easier sell when you're in a major city.
So I have a question for some of the folks in here.
Yeah.
So real estate's pretty easy, it's tangible, everybody understands it no matter where you go in the world. So when you're doing some of your non-real estate raises, how do you educate the retail investor that you're selling the product to on your operating business and have them get to that level where they feel comfortable making that investment?
I think it's an entirely different paradigm. So in South Florida, you have investors from South America that are investing in quick service restaurants. It's a completely different model. They're investing in a business model they understand. I think that's part of the popularity of real estate projects in America is that the Chinese have created a lot of wealth through real estate, so they understand that. So I think if you are looking to go outside of the main current of EB-5, you got to be very thoughtful about the business model that you're entering and who can relate to that in their own economy.
So the take home is don't go to the urban side?
No, not at all. I wouldn't say that at all. No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, the project's got to be economically feasible. If it's not economically feasible, I mean, why would you build it? Unless you think you're just going to use investors' money to build it, and then you'll deal with it later. That doesn't work. We've seen failures left and right all over the country. I mean, it's got to make sense. And if a bank will give you a senior loan, that validates your project in some respects. And then you've got to have a clear strategy for development and exit. I mean, it's real estate investment 101. I mean, it's really what it is.
I quite agree. I know I only have a few more minutes, but in the first panel, I gave everybody a magic wand to go to Congress and just get one wish. And Governor, you've had your wish, but I'm going to let you have a second one. So I'm just going to ask everybody, you have one wish, you can go to Congress with your magic wand and you can ask for anything you want and it's going to be granted. Michael, what do you want?
I would actually turn that around, and I would say to the industry, I see Peter here, I would say to the industry, let's not wait for Congress, let's not wait for USCIS to adopt any of these integrity measures. Why don't we just adopt them ourselves? And I'm not a regional center, I'm not a developer. We're simply an investment advisory firm. But the one problem we have with the industry is lack of transparency. So I would love it if the regional center operators and the developers were more transparent with us, the investment advisors and the wealth managers and the immigration attorneys who are constantly looking for more data. I would love if everybody here said, I'll release the I-924A. Then we know what you're doing. We know what you're saying is true or it's not. This is a federal document. Anyway, to answer your question, I would say to the...
I'm going to call you a lawyer in a minute.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think as an industry, we rely on Congress to fix our problems, and it's up to us. If we adopted these measures without USCIS, and we said we're going to be more transparent, and we just publish information on your activity, I think we'd all be a lot better off. And I guarantee we wouldn't have the SEC bringing new fraud investigations every week.
Okay, thank you. Michael, your magic wand, what's your one wish?
Yep, I'd echo what everyone said earlier of the visa cap. I mean, that's really what's fueled a lot of the debate on here and just the feeling that the market's crowded. If you open up to more visas, then China, the market will grow again, and then there's more room for everyone. So I think that fixes 90% of the problems. Transparency plus more visas would really increase the program.
Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, I absolutely echo those comments. Let's bring more direct investment into the United States. It'll create more diversity of the type of projects that are funded. And then the integrity measures are really kind of a layup. I think everybody's aligned on that piece.
All right, Jeff, what would you go to Congress with your one wish?
At the end of the day, I think we just like continuity. I think it's pretty difficult to operate a business in an ever-changing regulatory environment. So it would be nice if we had, some medium or long-term horizon and how this industry will pan out.
All right. Matt?
Well, after I ask them to reduce my taxes, I'll go right to EB-5. If I was a member of Congress after getting the governor's endorsement, of course, I would ask for a few things. Number one, I wouldn't, to answer the first question, make any distinctions between urban and rural projects. I would expand the scope and have very specific legislation that sets out standards to be achieved in terms of job growth, sustainability. We basically do four things in life, right? We need to live somewhere, we need to work somewhere, we need to go from point A to point B, and we need to be entertained and eat, right? There's other things we do, but for the most part, you can't ignore the fact that by 2030 and beyond, everyone's going to be living in cities. But we can't forget about rural America, and I think we should raise the ability to have more than 500,000 with specific integrity measures to prevent foreign money coming in that's not used for good purposes. There's a way to do that. We can figure that out. I think you should have, in my view, very monitored, but a goal to grow the number of visas. And I think we should look at different diversity of industries. The government subsidy thing may not be a good idea. I think we should have an EB-5 Shark Tank. Have broad, I'm serious, broad parameters that Congress sets and let the person who goes to rural America and, McDonald's farm, and they have an app or they have a farm-to-table solution, why shouldn't they be able to make the case to the investors that they can make money just like people in an urban environment? I think put it broad, put it out there, and I hope I have your vote. I think I'm announcing right now. This is all your fault.
Thank you.
Governor, your second wish of the day.
So there was an 18th century philosopher named Kant who, when describing the relationship between business and government, said that it's a natural tension in that government regulates, and then business finds ways around it, and then government regulates again. And it's written a lot these days by Dr. Alan Friedman, the professor of economics at Carnegie Mellon. And he explains that that's how we had this economic crisis in the first place, because the regulators from the SEC and the control of the currency were trying to get private jobs. So they didn't come down on as hard on these companies because they didn't want to be identified when they tried to work there. So what I wish Congress would do is to do what it's supposed to do and be the government that does regulate, because everybody says we're going to clean up our own act and no one ever does. I mean, I said I was going to clean up my room when I was 6 years old, and I never did, and I haven't changed. And so the point is that if Congress would stop bickering over these egalitarian issues like rural versus urban and really get to the issues of what would protect investors, then I think we'd have a real solution.
Thank you. Nick, I started with you. I'm going to end with you.
So there is a very comprehensive draft legislation that we've been working on with EB-5 Investment Coalition. It's going to be discussed in the next couple of days. It'll come out. It addresses all of this. It addresses rural, urban, and most importantly, integrity measures, transparency, due diligence, and the things that matter most in this industry. And it will shrink the industry once it's passed. And that's what needs to happen. Because right now, it's a little out of control, and it needs to be regulated. I mean, it was never used. This program was never used for many, many years. Come 2009, went from 8 regional centers to now over 800. So, I mean, that tells you in itself that it needs regulation and it needs some change. And we'll see that coming hopefully this year, end of this year, or early next year. But it's out there and it's happening.
Okay, now I know we're supposed to finish and go for lunch, but I'm just going to throw it out for a question. Anybody in the audience have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask in the first panel about the targeted employment areas and how...
That's been covered, actually. That's been covered in another panel.
Maybe someone have another question.
Yeah, something specific for this panel, please. Yes.
Hi, Kathleen Clara International. I have a question for distribution. Your industry isn't exactly regulated either in terms of objectivity. I mean, I'm in real estate, but there are other people who are in accounting, for example. They need to advise their clients as to which projects to invest in. And, there's no good companies. I'm sure you are an excellent practitioner, but there is no regulation as to how objective your industry is in terms of your, reviews of these projects.
Sure. First of all, I should say, to make the correct statement, I am actually regulated. We are regulated under FINRA, which is overseen by the SEC. So I may be one of the few speakers today who is regulated under FINRA. But to your point, you're absolutely right. Our analysis is subjective. Now, we try to use facts in determining which investments are risky and why. That is what we call quantitative analysis. But at the end of the day, if we have a client and he comes to us and says, we need to pick between 3 or 4 investments, which is the safest, you're absolutely right. That's a subjective question that we have to answer, but we try to do it objectively. We are not, myself personally, we are not paid commissions by the regional center. And I think that's what differentiates us from other people who provide due diligence. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's a subjective analysis. But we are regulated by FINRA. So if a client does complain, then they have a resource. They can go to the government and complain against us.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much, panel. You've been wonderful.
Thank you.